I'm speaking, as Danny said, partly as a member of the Open Justice Court of Protection project, which is a voluntary organisation that watches hearings in the Court of Protection. The Court of Protection is the court which makes decisions for people who can't make decisions for themselves in their best interests. It also makes decisions about whether an advance decision to refuse treatment is valid, and end-of-life decision-making is a small part, but very important part of that court's work. So the learning from practice bit is partly from my work with the Court of Protection. And that's my major area of work, and has been for the last 5 years. So this is a very, very small and tightly focused topic. And some of you just won't be interested, so I'm sorry, but it's only half an hour. It's only about refusing treatment. So if you remember Claire's little house with the little boxes, there's a little window on the left-hand side that says what you don't want. This is only about what you don't want. It's even more narrow than that. It's only about medical treatments that you don't want. So you can't use an advance decision to refuse treatment to say you don't want to go into a care home, or that you don't want to be given meat, or that you'll only eat kosher food, or whatever. I mean, that's in an advance statement. That's advanced planning. It doesn't have the legal effect that an advance decision to refuse treatment does. So those of you who are interested in advance decisions to refuse treatment will be people who have expressed the common sentiments that I'm about to put up here, or who know someone who has, and you want to help them out, and that might be in your professional life, or it might be in your personal life. So if you've ever said or thought, or if anybody's ever said to you anything like, if I'm ever like that, shoot me, I don't want to be kept alive tethered to machines if I'm just a vegetable, I hate the idea of fill in the gap, some treatment that they've had before or they've seen someone had, and whatever else happens, they just don't want that ever again. If I have no quality of life, just let me go. I don't want what happened to my father, my wife, my sister. Something bad happened. They watched it, they witnessed it, they experienced it. They don't want that happening to them. This talk is about how you give legal effect to those wishes, except for, guess which? Number one, that would be assisted dying in a form shooting that isn't ever going to be authorized anyway, whatever bill might or might not become law. And that's because it's actively killing. These other methods of treatment removal may result or may be followed. Technically, the law would say they might be followed by your dying. But they didn't cause it legally, which is a bit of a myth, but that's the way that the law works. And they're not in any way affected by the assisted dying bill or arguments about assisted dying, euthanasia, and all the rest of it. So get the idea of assisted dying, euthanasia, and killing people out of your head and put in the right to bodily autonomy, the right to refuse medical interventions, because that's what this is about. And this is what is guaranteed in legal principle by the Mental Capacity Act, which is 2005. This is not new. This is not kind of radical cutting-edge stuff. It's a very old, established legal bit of law, which doesn't work very well, and which is why cases keep ending up in the Court of Protection. So I said part of my reason for caring about this work and wanting to promulgate information about advanced decisions to refuse treatment is because I watch cases in the Court of Protection and I see the horrible experiences that families have when they're disagreeing about what somebody would want at the end of life, whether they would or wouldn't want continuing life-sustaining treatment. But I also have family experience of this. My sister Polly 5 years younger than me, was in a car crash in 2009. She suffered diffuse axonal injury, massive catastrophic brain damage. Doctors said very early on, within the first few days and weeks, that she would likely remain in a coma, a vegetative state, for the rest of her life, that there was a small possibility she might become minimally conscious, next stage up, or even regain consciousness, but that it was very unlikely that she would ever be able to live independently again, so she would need 24/7 care for the rest of her life, and that she would, very unlikely that she'd be ever able to make her own significant decisions about her life, ever again. Her family said, don't treat. She wouldn't want the quality of life that any of these options offers. There would be no return to her home, to her partner, to the life she had lived before and could live no more. A life in which she climbed mountains, sailed, worked for a charity to support people with mental illness who wanted independence. That wasn't on the list of possible outcomes for my sister. So we asked for treatment to be withdrawn. They denied it. They said that it wasn't in her best interests to have treatment withdrawn, that we didn't know what quality of life she might recover to, although they weren't offering anything other than I had said. And so they continued to treat. She emerged from her prolonged disorder of consciousness after about 2 years. She can swallow food, pureed food that is put into her mouth. 16 years later, she's in 24/7 care, unable to make any significant decisions about her life, with a quality of life that she would never have wanted. That shouldn't have happened. A best interest decision should never have come up with that as a solution, but it did, and I don't trust best interests decision making. I've sat in lots of best interest decision making about my sister and about other people since then, and I find that on the whole, despite people being well-intentioned and all the rest, best interest decision making doesn't always yield the same as what somebody would have wanted, and it doesn't have to by law. So I'm not willing personally to submit myself to best interest decision making by other people if I can avoid it, which is why my advanced decision to refuse treatment refuses all life-sustaining treatment if I don't have capacity to consent to it. Obviously, I might consent to some life-sustaining treatment. Obviously, with some kinds of surgery, I might choose to suspend my advanced decision temporarily for a short period. I can make, it's not fixed in stone for all time. That's not what ADRTs are like. But I have been DNA CPR, do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, for 15 years. I'm still here, but you know, if I have a cardiac arrest, none of you are to resuscitate me. I also have a health and welfare attorney to cover all of the best interest decisions that otherwise doctors, social workers, carers, whoever else are going to have to make. So she, my wife, she still has to make best interest decisions rather than what I would want, but at least she's making them, at least it's her making them, not people I've never met, not people who've only known me since I was admitted to a care home. So those two, I think, work together quite well. That's a not very good picture of my running backpack that I wear for fell running. There's a Keswick Mountain Festival every year, and I take part in challenges and rush over the fells in trying to beat my own last time record. That's my running bib. On the back of a running bib, those of you who do these kind of crazy things will know that there's quite often a medical form. They have to take that off to do CPR, and on the back, I don't know why that's not staying, on the back of my running bib, it says, do you have any medical conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, allergies, asthma, shortness? I've just circled no, I haven't got any of those things. And then there's a little space in which I've written, I have an advanced decision to refuse treatment, which refuses CPR under all circumstances. I maintain this refusal even if my life is shortened as a result. It's signed, dated, and it's witnessed. That is a valid and applicable binding advance decision if I have a cardiac arrest while running on the fells. I do alert first aid to it before we start. That's how simple an advance decision to refuse treatment can be.
So does that have to be backed up by a legal document as well?
That is a legal document.
So you don't need the other thing you've previously done, you can just do that on the day?
Yes. So the law is, as I said, the Mental Capacity Act 2005. Look at sections 24 to 26. That has all of the black letter law, the written down statutory law about advance decisions. The trouble is that if you just rely on that and on the guidance that I've been looking around at the organizations here, the guidance that you reproduce from the black letter law, you leave out all the case law, all the stuff that ends up in the Court of Protection that develops what's in the statute. So I know a lot more about how these things actually work from watching court hearings as well as from the statute, and we'll get to some of that. So an advance decision to refuse treatment is a way of recording your decisions to refuse medical treatment at a future time when you can no longer make or communicate such decisions. You can refuse any treatment that you want under any circumstances that you want, and it is not subject to best interest decision making. Several people have told me that my decisions are not in my best interests, not just in relation to this, but in relation to all sorts of other things I do. You know what? Stuff it. It's my decision. And a valid and applicable advance decision to refuse treatment is equivalent to a contemporaneous refusal. So it's like if I went into a hospital and they said, can we give you an injection? And I said no. And I was capacitous. That's a refusal. You can't go ahead, you can't do it. I'm going to just show you some examples because these things emerged from, in part, Jehovah's Witnesses and their refusal of blood products. So that is what that would be, if signed and witnessed by somebody who had capacity to make it at the time, a valid and applicable advance decision to refuse just one treatment, but under all circumstances. I refuse blood products under all circumstances. And it's got the magic sentence in that you have to have by law. You have to show that you know you might die as a result of your refusal. I maintain this refusal even if my life is shortened as a result. This is just another example. I mean, these are very flexible. You just, if there's only one thing you know you want to refuse, for goodness sake, you need an advance decision to refuse treatment. And if you only want to refuse it in one situation, like if you're in a permanent coma, then you need an advance decision. Refuse that thing in that situation. So this refuses clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, just one treatment, if you're ever in a prolonged disorder of consciousness, which would almost certainly mean you couldn't swallow, so death would follow. And that would be a legally binding advance decision. This one refuses just one treatment again, clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, but in two different situations, if you're in a prolonged disorder of consciousness or if you have advanced dementia. Again, it's up to you. You can also refuse all life-sustaining treatment, and there is a persistent myth that if you're going to refuse all treatments, you have to list them all. Well, that's nuts, isn't it? I mean, how long would that list be? You can give examples if you want, and you should maybe include explicitly clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, because not everybody knows or believes that that is a medical treatment. But you can just have a sentence that says, basically, I refuse all life-sustaining treatment, including but not limited to, whatever. But the problem with lists is you're going to leave something out, and then what? So if you don't want to be kept alive in a coma, a vegetative state, a minimally conscious state, prolonged disorder of consciousness, just refuse all life-sustaining treatments if you're in that state. Can't be diagnosed for 6 weeks after your brain injury, but, you might give it 6 weeks, or you might not want to. I don't want to, but, You can, you can refuse all life-sustaining treatments in a prolonged disorder of consciousness and something else, like advanced dementia. You can even refuse all life-sustaining treatments in all situations, and I'm not the only person who's done it. This is Avril Henry's advanced decision to refuse treatment. I knew Avril. She contacted me when she got into trouble with her ADRT, and people said she couldn't they had to do CPR on her because it's a medical duty to preserve life, and it was unethical for her to whatever. So I supported her through a legal challenge to that. She was refusing all medical treatments and procedures aimed at prolonging or artificially sustaining my life. I maintained this refusal in the hope that my life will be shortened as a result. That was her version of the, I know it might shorten my life, jolly good. She had intractable pain, wouldn't take opioids. She was, yeah. So that was a valid advanced decision as well. So you can start these lists of life-sustaining treatments, but as I said, there may be a particular treatment that you don't want that would be worth putting in, and CNH is often worth putting in because many doctors still tell me it's basic care. Food and water. But there may be other things that are life-sustaining that you don't necessarily think of. So for me, I take medication for high blood pressure. I've taken it for 30 years. That's probably life-sustaining, so I don't want that after I have my severe brain injury or dementia or whatever. So you need to think widely about it. A lot of people say they don't want medical treatments, if and only if they don't have any more what for them is quality of life. And that's okay, that's a perfectly understandable position, but how is a doctor supposed to know what for you constitutes quality of life? It leaves them, even if they do know, it leaves them with a prognostic difficulty, like how much better are you going to get, or at what point is your life no longer what for you is quality of life. It also leaves them with an existential difficulty if you said you wouldn't feel you had quality of life if you could no longer do X, Y, or Z, and you've reached the stage where you can no longer do X, Y, or Z, but you seem really happy. And that sometimes happens with dementia. People are horrified at the idea of getting dementia, but then they become happy people. And that causes difficulties. So those are the sorts of things that if you're going to say quality of life, A, you need to say what you mean by it, and B, you need to think, well, what if my idea about quality of life changes? If you've still got capacity, you can rewrite your advanced decision, of course. But if you haven't got capacity, then can you think ahead to, okay, do you want to be kept alive with advanced dementia and a feeding tube if they're willing to offer it, which many places still are, if you're a happy dementia patient? You know, this is the sort of thing that you can put in to an advanced statement that goes alongside your advanced decision. So how do you make one of these things? It is a legally binding document. You don't need a solicitor or any particular legal form. Some people like forms. If you want one, go and get one from Compassion in Dying or one of the other organizations that has one. I like just opening documents and writing, but people take different perspectives. You can simply write out what you want to refuse. Just make sure that you've got the magic sentence in there, you've got it signed, you've got it witnessed, or use a template. And do bear in mind, do not yourself get diverted or divert anybody else onto respect forms or 20 wishes booklets or you know, the sorts of things that hospitals and other organizations produce, because they're virtually never a legally binding form. They're very convenient for hospitals and places, but they don't fulfill the legal function of an advanced decision to refuse treatment. So this document, the DNA CPR form, is unfortunately what is used in my health authority, and they ignore my ADRT in favor of, have you got the form with the red border? And I say, yeah, and what it says on it is she's not for CPR, and they've ticked the box that says she's not for CPR because she's refused it. Would you like to see the document in which I've refused it? But they always want that one. So it's about the interface between the law and medical practice, which is a bit weird to work. And the respect form, usually the versions I've seen, say attach an ADRT, and then there's no way of attaching it anyway, and no one's going to fill in a respect form for me while I'm still running over fells and giving talks, and you know, I'm not on anybody's end-of-life register or palliative care radar. There are legal requirements and what are called safeguards as part of the Act, which mean that this document does have to be in writing, signed, witnessed, and to have the magic sentence. It also says that it's not valid if you've withdrawn the decision, and you can do that orally. So when I had my first COVID injection, you know, like what's in it and what's it going to do to me, I said, you know what, if I collapse in the next hour and you can inject me with something because I might be in an anaphylactic shock or something, you can do that. I will suspend for an hour, and you can do that orally. You must not do anything inconsistent with the advanced decision remaining your final decision, fixed decision. So something like converting from being a Jehovah's Witness to being a Muslim, which somebody did do and forgot she'd filled in her blood refusal thing. That was discounted in a court of law. If there are things you didn't predict, that can also invalidate your advanced decision. So again, when COVID struck, I thought, I didn't predict the COVID pandemic, did I? I better restate that I'm still refusing a ventilator, because otherwise somebody might say, yeah, but she didn't know when she refused a ventilator that COVID was about to happen. And obviously it's also not valid if you lack capacity to make one in the first place. Now, I made my first one with clinical depression in the few months after Polly's torture at the hands of doctors. So I was worried that they would not see it as valid, so I got a capacity assessment done. And I attached my capacity assessment to my advanced decision. In practice, these actually can work well, which means they're not seen by lawyers in the court, but I've seen so many bad ones. So many people tell me they think they've got one, and I ask for it, and it turns out to be a respect form or a DNA CPR or something filled in by, there's a Dignitas thing that's called an advance directive, which is doesn't fulfill the legal requirements in this country. So there are just some really, really bad forms out there. And also they're very vague and muddled, and anyone who looks at our website for the Open Justice Court of Protection Project at the moment will see that I've got one up there on the website about a current hearing that's going through the courts where the guy has muddled together things like, I don't want a feeding tube with, and I don't want my mother to visit either. And they're different things. The second one is not a refusal of treatment. You can't put it there. So it's caused immense difficulty. And his mother's very cross and has brought a case that none of it's valid. Even when they are valid and applicable, I'm afraid that from my personal experience, apart from anything else, I know that people don't always understand that they're binding, legally binding, and you must do it. I kept being told mine can't be legal because it's not in my best interests, or it hasn't been signed off by a doctor. Excuse me. They get lost in the system all the time, and you get newspaper headlines like this: woman kept alive for 22 months in a coma after she had, I forget what happened to her, stroke. There's another quite famous case, a woman in a vegetative state for 3 years, where the hospital knew there was an advanced decision, phoned her GP and said, what does it say? And the GP didn't send it over. The GP said, oh, it says she doesn't want cardiovascular resuscitation. Well, it didn't. And when they finally got it, 3 years later, it said she didn't want a feeding tube, she didn't want anything if she was in this kind of state. There's a news report there. Just depressing. And that led to a whole long judgment by the person who was then the vice president of the Court of Protection about the proper approach to ADRTs. That's the sort of thing that doesn't get into the guidance from your organizations, by the way. You don't put the case law in, you only put the statutory stuff in, and the case law is what the courts are going to use when it gets there. A fairly recent case in 21 concerned, again, a Jehovah's Witness. She'd appointed her children as her lasting power of attorney, and she hadn't told them about her. Is that telling me to stop? No. She hadn't told, good. She hadn't told her children about her advanced decision to refuse treatment, although she was appointing them with lasting power of attorney. And they were opposed to the Jehovah's Witness faith. They wanted her to have a blood transfusion. She'd lost capacity. The judge ruled that she should have a blood transfusion because she'd acted inconsistently by appointing them as LPAs with ticking the box that they had life-sustaining treatment rights without telling them about this. But many people don't tell their children or other members of their family that they have advanced decisions to refuse treatment. I have to persuade them quite hard to do this sometimes, partly because it'll upset them. They'll realize mum might die one day if I show them this, and partly because they think their family won't agree with their decisions to refuse treatment. Well, isn't it better to find that out now and have that argument now rather than be in the vegetative state and have your family go, "Ah, she can't have meant it. It was done under false circumstances." So, you know, I've had families come to me and talked and argued about these things so that it's dealt with in advance. I've got a few bits of information about how to make it effective, which includes making sure that you're refusing what you want to refuse and not other things, that you update it. I update mine most years. I have a reminder in my calendar that pops up saying, do you want to update your ADRT? And I almost always do, especially with reference to the most recent court case, which usually gives me something else to add as to no, I need to defend myself against that as well. Coercion is the latest one. She must have written it under coercion from somebody else. So I didn't, all right? Telling people about it, making sure that you get a capacity assessment if there's any reason for doubting it, and writing an advanced statement, because it's awfully nice for doctors to know why you're refusing treatment. So mine says, I don't have to tell you about my reasons. They're legally binding anyway, even if you think my reasons are bad and my decision's unwise. But I'm going to explain why I've made the decisions I have, because I think if you understand my reasoning, this might help you feel better about withdrawing or withholding life-sustaining treatment, because you'll then know that you're acting in accordance with my wishes, not just following legal instructions. This is sort of a plea from beyond the other side of capacity to my doctors to please do what I want, but I've tried to phrase it nicely. And to give some sort of explanation, though I don't have to, about why I'm doing this. Please respect my autonomy. Please respect my self-determination. You don't have to do this, but I think it will help. You have to be persuasive, basically. It's not enough to be legally in the right if, A, nobody else understands the law, B, they're willing to not obey the law in view of their ethical concerns, and C, then it's too late. So that's just some information about how to let people know about your ADRT. That's Compassion in Dying, which is the organization that has a template that many people find useful. And that's the logo for the Open Justice Court of Protection project, which is fascinating to watch court hearings where these kind of end-of-life decisions are being made. And there are a few coming up that if anybody emails me, I could let them know when they're happening. And you can hear people in court arguing about advanced decisions to refuse treatment and whether they're valid or not and what's in somebody's best interests. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celia. It's absolutely fascinating. And I would so recommend watching online the court cases, and sometimes you can go in person, or is that stopped now?
No, you can go in person to any, if they're in person, you can go to a court hearing. Loads of them, though, you watch online. They log you in on Microsoft Teams or something.
It's fascinating. Also, if you're a nurse, it's great for your revalidation as well. So, again, any questions? Oh, yeah. Stephen?
Got a few online. How can a child write a valid ADRT?
You have to be over 18.
So it's something a parent can't write it on their behalf?
Parent can't write on their behalf.
Oh, no, no. These are your own documents. You can't write them for somebody else.
So if you were under 18, you were like 17, you wouldn't be able to write an ADRT?
You could write an advanced statement stating your wishes and preferences, and there are some very interesting court cases in the Court of Protection where 16 and 17-year-olds have expressed strong views at variance of those with their parents. So it's not that you're not going to get your own way necessarily if you're 16 or 17, but you can't use this particular legal tool.
Thank you. Does the witness need to be a clinician?
Does the witness need to be?
A clinician?
No, no, no. My wife was my witness.
There are no particular rules?
They're witnessing that they saw you sign. So it can be anybody. They're not witnessing that they've read it or that they agree with it or that you've discussed it with a doctor or anything. You don't have to discuss it with a doctor, which I recommend you do, but you don't have to legally. There's somebody at the front here.
Just to join on to that really quickly, sorry. Just to tag on to what you just said, if your wife was the one who witnessed it, if she was in your will, would that be attested to, or would there be complications to that, do you think? Or
So in my full advanced decision to refuse treatment, like the 4-page version, she's not, because I was worried about that. There's nothing in law that says it,
okay.
but, you know, I can imagine the doctor or the nurse, you know, is going to, they look, it feels like, to me, that everybody in the medical profession that I encounter wants to keep me alive, and that everybody is desperate to find that my advanced decision to refuse treatment is not valid or not applicable. And so I am putting in every safeguard that I can.
Yeah.
On the race bib, she was running behind me. So if as she usually does, so if I were to collapse and they started CPR, she would be there 2 or 3 minutes later and able to explain that they needed to stop right away. So she was quite useful to have in that context.
Thank you, Celia. Oh, Lucy, and then I'll come down here. Sorry.
I've got so many. I mean, Celia, it's so interesting, and I've millions of things I want to say and talk about, so I'm not sure.
There is the lunch break as well. I will be around.
I mean, as a dastardly doctor, I think the thing is, I mean, I can't speak for all doctors, but I would say that my own, I mean, looking at you, for example, the running badge ADRT you wrote, is, you know, it's terrifying as a clinician because you are terrified of being sued or sent to prison, being told you haven't done what you should have done.
Yeah.
And I know that I would see that and I think, oh my God, now
I
what do
see
I
that
do?
panic in
And
the
you would
eyes of
err on
every
the side
doctor.
of
Yeah.
keep them alive because you're terrified.
So how have I dealt with that? First of all, I see that panic with every doctor I encounter, particularly when I went in for surgery recently. And I try to allay that. I've also used not just the carrot of thank you for respecting my wishes. I realize this is hard for you. I really appreciate your... I've also used a stick. So in my advanced decision to refuse treatment, it says, I have instructed my family and my lasting power of attorney to sue for assault and battery any doctor who performs CPR on me or other surgery against my will. It's the most I can do. But exactly what you're saying is the case. The system isn't set up.
I mean, the other point I wanted to come on to is the importance of having your advocates well-informed and available.
Yes.
Because it is difficult. You know, if you can have, I've got no problems. If you explain to me, I would gladly follow your instructions. But in the absence of you being able to, which obviously is the whole reason why these documents exist, that's harder. So it's your advocates that are going to be
well, we advocated
expressing.
for Polly and were told that we were after her money and that she must have left us a lot of money in her will and that we didn't love Polly. So there is always a suspicion about families. I would say we were also seen as a very difficult family. We were, was it the chimpanzees that were mentioned before? The people who had the audacity to read some medical articles about prolonged disorder of consciousness and then argue with the doctors about not the prognosis as such, but the consequences of the prognosis. So I think I've learned since then to pander to doctors' egos more, to treat them more as people who have their own anxieties and terrors about our decisions, and also to treat, I think I have to recognize that my particular set of views are like on the extreme end of what they're likely to encounter, and that needs particularly careful management. I must say, I resent very much having to do all this emotional work on my medical practitioners, for my medical practitioners, when I'm the one who's ill, I'm the one who's going in for surgery, and they're the ones who are in a state of complete anxiety and panic.
So doctors are people too. I think I do take issue a little bit with the kind of adversarial sort of nature, because obviously we want to care, and it's hard because there's a lot of doctor bashing in the media.
Yes.
And I think it is just important to, please do be compassionate, because we are just people trying to do our best.
I am
wanting
terribly
to
compassionate.
understand.
Yes, I am
So I
terribly
think there is
compassionate.
some work. If you
Where
have an
compassion
unusual view, it's
breaks
important to
down is where I was at a professional seminar with doctors, lawyers, and philosophers, ethicists, to discuss advanced decisions to refuse treatment, referred to my own DNA CPR, and was told by an intensivist that if I collapsed right there and then, in front of the audience, he would do CPR on me in my best interest because I had so much to offer the world. This led, I was absolutely chilled. This led to a very interesting discussion with the lawyers and the ethicists about what they would do, including various people who were going to lie over my body to prevent him from doing this, because they also felt so distraught about this. So I think the compassion for Dominic Bell, who was the intensivist in this particular case, in a public arena, so I don't feel bad about mentioning his name, is limited. I do also think that some of the doctors I have encountered, particularly in relation to poly, bring their own religious values and their own strong ethical values, and they're actually not hearing my ethical values, or most importantly, poly's ethical values. And their values override completely in often the language of compassion and care and the opportunity that poly's vulnerability and damage offers us to love a new person who will rise from the ashes of the old. And I find it authoritarian, I find it offensive, and I find it self-centered in the extreme. So my encounters with doctors have become less stressful, I think, on both sides, since I have understood their vulnerabilities and pandered to them, but it doesn't make me feel very good about the profession as a whole, and it makes me absolutely determined to escape their clutches because I have no faith that my own wishes will be respected. I didn't want to be in this position. This is not the angle that I wanted to have, so I'm sorry that it comes across as, I think, as much more confrontational in this context where I'm talking to an audience than it does when I'm actually engaging on behalf of my sister or myself, when I'm doing the emotional management, the emotional labor, the kind of care and compassion for the doctor that they seem to need in that context. So I don't think I think I behave better now than I used to when I'm a care user, a service user. And I get my own way slightly more.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you. Was there another question? Or? Yeah, we just got one more question. I'm so sorry, because I did promise this lady.
Thank you. Just a quick question about expanding the concept of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. So my mum's got an ADRT, which actually I think is going to need reviewing, because she has her statement about clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, then she goes straight on to say, I do not wish to ever be fed by another person. And I'm just wondering where that sits. Does that sit under clinically assisted nutrition? It doesn't. It sits under care, doesn't it? So it sits under the advanced statement of wishes. Yeah, okay. That means I've got some work to do.
The only exception around that would be when they were doing swallow testing, that sort of thing, so you get speech and language therapists trying it out, and you can refuse that. I've refused assessments of various kinds, but once, like Polly now, she can swallow pureed food put into her mouth. That's what she lives on for last 14 years. And you can't take that away legally.
Unless it's been recorded as part of wishes and you've got somebody to carry those wishes out for you.
Well, the PEG feed and the nasogastric feed is a medical treatment. Putting food in somebody's mouth that they can then swallow is not a medical treatment. So it's, as you say, part of the advanced statement.
Yeah, and then me as LPA for my mum, because we've got the LPA set up, know that that's part of her wishes and I can therefore refuse that on her behalf.
You can say she wouldn't want it, but I don't think anyone would be legally allowed not to give it.
That's interesting.
Because it's basic care. It's basic care. I mean, if she chokes on it, I mean, it becomes very difficult because some people demand to be fed when they're choking on it and they're refusing a tube. So I think speak to some speech and language therapists about that, because there's some really interesting work around that and about the ethics of it. But I think the law doesn't permit you to starve and dehydrate someone to death if they don't have capacity. If she's got capacity at the time, she can refuse feeding. So the voluntary decision not to eat and drink, if you have capacity, is something that you can do. And there's some information about that on the Compassion in Dying website. It's very difficult. There's a lack of policy about that. People are very edgy about it,
yes.
Professionals. But if she's got capacity, she can refuse to eat and drink. But of course, at some point, she'll lose capacity. And then she has to have something in place that says, and do not put a feeding tube in at that point. So it depends whether your mum has capacity at the point that she wants to stop eating and drinking. But there's a lot of information. If you Google voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, it's all out there.
Thank you so much, Celia.
That's
Yes,
fine,
so interesting. Thank you.